What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Pasty-T Garage. In this episode, we are going to be working again on our 2004 Ford Focus wagon. Today, what we're going to be doing is reinstalling a thermostat housing. So, thermostat housing, you can kind of see the 3 bolts right here, and that big opening in the head is where the thermostat connects. And the reason we're replacing the housing, and I'll show you down here. So here's the old one. You can kind of see where there's some cracks. Let me get a light. You can definitely see where there's a crack. There's another crack forming. Basically, it decided to leak on me, and I was leaking coolant in the driveway. So that really wasn't cool. But we tracked down the leak. We found that the thermostat housing was broken, so we went ahead and replaced it. I'm gonna shift on back. So here's the new one. As you can see, no cracks. O-ring is completely sealed, as opposed to this one that kind of can flex a little bit. So obviously that's not going to create a good seal if the O-ring can't hold on. The new housing came with so there's 3 pieces. There's this main body. There's this front piece that has this little I guess tip that comes out so that it can have flow that goes back into the head. And then the thermostat itself, which is this metal piece in there. The old housing also had a metal bracket right here that I swapped over. And then this hose that connects to the crossover pipe in front of the engine by the radiator, I went ahead and transferred that over while it was out. So one thing I do want to point out, it's going to be a little difficult to see. So this is the new housing. I'm going to shine a light in there. You can kind of see somewhere in there, there's like a copper looking circle. That is what they call the floater valve. Might be able to see it from the front. It's really difficult to see while it's in there, but I do have my old housing. So the housing just comes apart with these 3 Torx bolts. They are a 30, I believe. I might be lying to you. They're probably like a 20. They look a little too small to be a 30. So you can kind of see right here this little flow valve. You can hear a little bit. That is the valve that opens up when the thermostat wants to that's basically a bleed valve. So when the thermostat is having coolant go through it, there's going to be air, just because the system just traps air, and for it to release to go back into the tank or the radiator or whatever it goes back into, it needs this air valve up at the top. So they call it you can call it a float valve, you can call it like a jingle valve or something like that. Either way, that needs to be in the 12 o'clock position. So since here's the head, the thermostat gets bolted to the head, you want that little jingle valve in the 12 o'clock position. You want it up so that all the air can escape at the highest point of the thermostat. Very important. So just a little tip for anybody doing thermostat replacement. So we're going to be installing the new thermostat housing, front housing, because it all came together as a kit, onto the car, filling it up with coolant and bleeding out the air. And then we're going to go test drive it to make sure that there's no leaks. So I hope y'all look forward to this journey. I did kind of, like y'all see, I did kind of take apart some of the stuff, and I'll go ahead and go through what I took apart while we put it all back together and kind of describe to you how I found the leak. Maybe if you have a similar leak, you could look at that as well. But unfortunately, I didn't know this was the broken part until I removed it, and I saw that obviously there's some pieces missing, and the little gasket is not going to be able to seal very well. So, alright, let's start. Alright, so I'm going to walk you through some of the stuff that I removed in order to gain access to this portion of the car. Let me grab my focused light. So like I said, again, this is where the thermostat actually attaches to the engine. There is a coolant hose back here that has actually need to reset this. It has a clamp that I need to reset. The other part that connects to it is this main radiator hose that goes to the upper part of the radiator. There is the pipe that's connected to the new housing that goes right here on this little crossover tube. And that's about it. Bolts up. I removed the coil pack that goes right there, just so I could get a little bit more like visual clearance. Don't need to remove the bracket. You can work around it. Once you get the thermostat housing loose, you can shift it forward and back so you can get this hose off. I did remove these connectors. There's one for mass airflow sensor, one for the coil pack itself, and then there's another bracket that attaches to this. And then I removed the coil pack, the coil wires. I'm sorry, the spark plug wires. So I removed all those. Draining the radiator, I'll show you where to do that. That's underneath. I already tightened that back up. So we're going to reset these clamps. These clamps are a little tricky. Basically they have you see a little detent up here that they'll catch on. So you have to like walk it around that to make sure that it will go on the other side. I don't know. To me, it was an interesting idea from Ford, and a little tricky to get back in. Basically, this part has to go on the outside of it. I'm not very good at these. There we go. That wasn't that bad. Alright, so as you can see, the clamp is in its standard orientation. So we're going to go ahead and open it up, put it over the hose, but orient it to where we can get it in the car. So fish the hose up, put it around the hose. I think I did use it different. Yeah, so these are some needle nose, really, these are actually kind of neat. So they're kind of like an angled needle nose plier, but they can fit in really, really tight areas because they have like a dual hinge. Pretty helpful. Definitely helped with this project. So I'm going to grab the clamp, squeeze on a little bit, orient it over the hose. I'm going to put a little bit past so we can get it back on the... Might be a little difficult to see. There we go. Okay, that should be good. You can see it's a little bit past where the markings are, where it would fit on the housing. Alright, so the other thing I didn't do when I was removing it is move this bracket. So this bracket's basically just a small coolant channel or power steering pump, or I don't know, some sort of a line that I'm just going to move out of the way. So I believe it's 8. Okay, yeah, so it's an 8. I'm just going to move that out of the way, just so I have a little bit more clearance, because it's a little tricky getting it in there when you have the tiny plastic pipe at the front. I don't want to break that pipe because then we'll need a new housing. So there's that, and then over here there's another 8 underneath my mat. Remove that so that we can flex the hose. Now, what I will say is this this line itself, if it's hitting your heat shield, it makes a terrible noise. So make sure that it's off the heat shield when you tighten it back up. If not, you'll hear just a horrendous like rattling noise. It'll sound like your engine's falling apart. You don't want that. So I'm just going to move this to keep pressure off this hose. We want to move this a little bit. Where's my heat? Move this bracket just to give it really good flexibility. Okay, so there we go. So now we can move that while we wiggle the housing in. Alright, so housing, I'm going to kind of squeeze it underneath. Pick it up at the back because it's got that plastic hose that's dragging on the transmission right now. It's kind of a tight fit. this out of the way a little bit. So it's going to fight you a little bit because there's this, I believe this is EGR. It's like right in the way, kind of preventing extra clearance. There we go. We got the back of the hose up. So basically what I did, you can see on this, it goes on like this. So the back of the hose is facing down. I just kind of lifted it up and then followed it through like that. So might be helpful to do it that way. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this hose, we'll slip it on the housing, and then we're going to tighten that clamp, because once the, yeah, so you can see where it's slipped on. We're going to tighten that clamp on, because once it's installed, it's going to be a little difficult to get this hose all the way on. So we're going to grab our handy dandy, wherever I put them, right here. Super good clearance needle nose. Gotta get a little bit of a gusto on that grip. I'm gonna walk it. It's a little tight. There we go, almost. As you can see, everything kind of wants to fight you. Oop. Go. So basically what I did was I applied pressure at the bottom of the hose clamp, and then I just walked it so they could go over. Because what you're trying to do, so here's the old housing. What you're trying to do is walk it over this ridge right here, and then the front has the same ridge, so we'll have to worry about that. But all right, so that back hose clamp is installed. So we're going to move the housing all the way back. All right, I'll go ahead and put this hose on this front right here. Not 100% necessary to do right now, but just keep me from fighting it. There we go. Again, we're just walking it over. Alright, so now we have our 3 bolts. These are the 3 bolts that came out the housing. We're just going to kind of jiggle the housing until I can get the bolts all the way in. And then once it lines up with the head, then it'll just kind of pop in. And the bottom one's a little tricky because it's underneath. So should have probably had that one in. We're going to walk it in between that EGR pipe and this harness loom. There we go. Alright. So I'm just going to hand start the 2 top, which is going to orient the bottom to be able to be hand started as well. Because once that mates up to the head, then I can slide the bottom in and kind of wiggle it until that's in its orientation. Because as you can see, even though I have 2 bolts in, there's still a little bit of wiggle room. There we go. So I hand thread those all the way in. So this is a plastic housing, which is why it broke. Heat cycles of the engine obviously make plastic a little brittle. So over the course of however many heat cycles this old housing went through, just decided to shatter. And the part that touches the block is very, very thin plastic. So it doesn't take a lot for it to, kind of lose its flexibility, and then it just becomes brittle and snaps. So not uncommon for these things to break, just kind of not the it's kind of not ideal, obviously. All right, so those are 10 millimeters. I'll grab a 10 millimeter ratchet wrench, and we're gonna just not over tighten, because again, it's plastic housing, metal bolts. They do have like a metal sleeve on the inside of them, but we don't want to test the strength of it. So because this bottom bolt isn't super tight, I'm just putting pressure on the bolt head and the ratcheting portion of the wrench, so that way I have enough resistance to where the ratchet itself will catch. Okay, so once it's a little tight, I'm going to go ahead and get the top ones just a little tight as well, and then I'm just going to give it a little squeeze to make sure that it's fully secure on the engine. Again, you don't want to go too tight. There are specific torque specs for these bolts. I mean, they're M10, so it might just be a standard M10 torque, but I doubt it because it's in plastic, so you don't want to go crazy. Alright, so that housing is installed. The next step is to reinstall our upper radiator hose. So I'm going to slip it on. Move this out of the way. Okay, first thing I need to do is orient the... Yeah, we need to orient the hose clamp, because that is not going to be easy to get to. So it looks like we can orient it up because it may not interfere. I say that, and it may immediately interfere. We might be able to squeeze it on that way. I don't know if my needle nose are gonna flex enough to get in there. Not quite hitting on the brackets, that's good. It is tight on that EGR hose, but it's not quite. There we go. Alright. These are incredible. Highly recommended. These are Cobalt, or actually they're Vice Grip, but I bought them at Lowe's, so you can check it out. Alright, so the other hose that goes on the connect, it's the kind of like the little bleed hose that goes on the coolant reservoir. So this just attaches right here on top, goes on, and then just got a little clamp. Nothing too fancy. Walk that over the little piece on the housing, if I can get it. Alright. Apparently I cannot get it. There we go. Alright, so that's on. And then this just squeezes into the top part. Ooh. Alright, so that's the housing reinstalled. We're going to go ahead and reinstall all of the coil pack, harnesses. We're going to reinstall these brackets, make sure this pipe is not touching the heat shield on the exhaust, because that'll cause terrible noises. Oh, the other thing is, I pulled this off earlier. Your car may or may not have it. It's just a plastic piece that keeps these hoses from touching. So we're going to go ahead and reinstall that. Just keeps them oriented. Not a big deal, but nice to have if you have it. Alright. Now, if y'all saw my how to do a coil pack and wires and everything video, you're already familiar with how this goes on. But just as a kind of reminder, so what is this? 225. Alright, so since I dropped two of the 4 bolts, and one fell to a spot that I couldn't see, I'm going to go ahead and put the bolts in the holes, line them up loosely, and then I can hand thread them in without dropping them. Because even with all this light, it's still hard to see. So yeah, so all those are bolted in by hand, run them all the way down by hand, and then I'll just kind of tweak them a little bit just to make sure that they're tight. Since there are 4 bolts on this, you can do a star pattern. So you just do the 4 corners. With 3 bolts, it's difficult to do a star pattern, so you just kind of tighten them up until they're all square and kind of give it a little bit extra torque with your hand to get it. Alright, so we're going to go star pattern. There's that one. And these don't have to be crazy tight either, because it's not load bearing or anything. Alright, there's that. Alright, so next thing we're going to do is reinstall our boots onto the coil. So if you're unsure of the orientation, the coil pack itself, I'll remove this boot. It does have, you can see right there, shows 2 and 4, so you can just trace the wire, make sure it's going to cylinder 2. And for those that don't know, on an inline engine, the front of the engine is cylinder 1, 2, 3, 4. Same goes for inline 6. For V engines, usually the first cylinder is the driver's side, very front, in the firing order. So it's usually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to say usually because not all manufacturers are the same when it comes to the coil pack, but on inline, it's always in order. Now there might be an example, drop a comment below if you know of one, where they start at the back and then go forward, but for Ford, on this particular engine, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So just to put that out there. Alright, we are going to install these harnesses. So this is the bracket that I was telling you that has the extra sensor. So this goes underneath the throttle cable, back here. Yep, if I can get it. A little tight. There we go. There we go, that's clipped in. And that's just an 8mm bolt. I'm sorry, 7mm bolt. You don't have to remove that whole bracket, but I couldn't get the connector unplugged. So I just removed the bracket. Alright, there's that. Got my wrench back because I don't need that. Alright, now we just reinstall 2 brackets and make sure that they are causing this line to not interfere with the heat shield. Alright, so this rubber grommet fell. We'll just slide it back up. Might be hard to see. Okay, it is 13. What is going on here? Alright, so we're going to ensure this is not touching anything, and then I'm going to tighten it down while holding pressure. Not touching. Okay, everything's tight. No more bolts. So let me show y'all where the drain is on the radiator. It's gonna be probably a little difficult to see, but we'll get in there with light. And then all we need to do is fill it up with coolant and test for leaks. So this right here has the Phillips orientation. That is your drain. It's not going to drain 100% of the coolant out of the engine, but for our purposes it drained enough. So that's where it is for back. So this is the driver's side part of the radiator. In the transmission, there's the transmission. So that's where the drain is. Alright, so now that we've got the car all put back together, next step is to go ahead and fill it up with coolant. Now, the coolant that I buy for this vehicle, it's the gold. And the original says use gold. Ford also has like a red, and I think it's just for these model years, it's just red and gold, but use the gold one. So the one I use is concentrate, 50% water. You can kind of see there. Basically, I have a used one that I'll pour in that's already mixed, and then I'll go ahead and dump half of this into that one, fill them both with water, and then I just have extra. Because this car likes to give me coolant leak after coolant leak. It's like a fix one problem and then the pressure decides that another piece is weak, so it's all good. It's a 2004. It's expected to have some sort of issues, so we're going to go ahead and fill it up with coolant. So now that I got these mixed, I go ahead and just write 50-50 mix on them, just so that I am not confused later if, let me turn the light back on, whether or not it has been mixed. So now that this is a full gallon, we're going to go ahead and dump a lot of it in there. I did fill up a little bit. You might be able to hear the bubbling. So the Ford Focus takes a surprising amount of coolant. If you buy a single gallon of 50-50 mix, it's probably not going to fill up your coolant all the way. It's another reason I recommend getting the concentrate, because then once you have, you know, 2 of them, you have 2 full gallons, and that should be plenty. So you can kind of see the bubbles. It's just purging some of the air that it can purge right now. It won't purge everything until the engine's at operating temperature. But now that it's all the way full, I'm going to go ahead and start the car, bleed out some of the air, fill it up as necessary. Once the thermostat opens, then it'll bleed out the rest of the air, you know, anything that's trapped in the top part, and then it'll drop, fill it up with more. So go ahead and let that happen. But that's it as far as the repair goes. Once we get everything bled, let it sit in the garage, warm up, make sure there's no leaks, nothing obvious that I forgot to tighten up or, you know, plug in or whatever. And then that'll be it. Then it'll be ready for a test drive. So yeah, that's it for today's video. Again, we worked on a 2004 Ford Focus wagon. We did the thermostat housing, which located here. With the housing, we got a new thermostat. We went ahead and filled it with coolant and let it bleed. We're going to go test drive it to make sure that there's no leaks. And yeah, not a terrible repair. The hardest thing I would say is just getting the hose clamps loose and getting everything oriented out. You just have to work with it, wiggle it a little bit, you know, be able to flex the housing back and forth as you work it, just to make sure that you have proper clearance to get all the hose clamps on and off. But that's going to do it for me today. So thanks everybody for joining me. If you have any comments, questions, or you know, anything that you want to talk about, just leave a comment below. If you like the video, hit that like button, and that's it. Subscribe for some more content. We're going to be trying to put out some more content. I've been a little absent lately, but that'll change. So thanks everybody for your continued support. See you in the next video.